Our plan for the first wave of public alpha is to rebuild all 40 specializations. That's quite a statement. It's what we've got from Blizzard here, and for some people, this is exciting beyond belief. Obviously, for others, this could be the beginning of the end of the World of Warcraft that they know and love, because huge changes are coming. But hey, at least survival hunters can now go and dual wield like Rexxar. And on top of that, Fury warriors can finally transmog over to one-handers. And at long last, rogues have finally got a lot of love. But there may be a little bit of a catch here. So here's the deal overall. Throughout most of the War Within, especially as time went on, patches looked light on class changes. There were a few reworks, sure, some emergency fixes, but compared to Dragonflight, it was almost concerning. Now we know why. Blizzard was clearly preparing for this, putting resources into this, because now every single spec is getting substantial changes to match Blizzard's new vision, a vision that they call approachable. So, we gotta talk about approachable combat and what that means, and certainly this is where some of you may start to disagree. Now, Blizzard's stance is that WoW is too complex for most players. Between too many buttons, too many auras to track, and too many subtle talent interactions, many people just can't understand it. And in their giant post, they argue this impacts everyone, new players to skilled alike, and they say they have an aim. And it's an insanely ambitious aim that basically is to have their cake and eat it too. They want gameplay to be clearer, they want it to be easier to understand, but they also want to retain the depth of mastery. And to make these 3 paragraphs very short, here's what they're going to be doing. They'll be making the most unique and visual parts of your spec the important parts. That way, it's obvious what actually matters in your gameplay. Then, they're making sure that you don't need too much info to play. Basically, if you need to know something, they'll make it obvious via your UI, but they'll do that without crowding things. So to put this goal in relatable terms, they don't want situations where, as an example, there are a bunch of buffs and auras that you've got to manually track in order to play your class well, because that's just the thing that makes people feel like they need to use weak auras. Okay, last then is cognitive load. Some specs will take more focus than others here, but as a whole, their goal is making sure specs don't require so much concentration that they aren't fun. Now, to actually accomplish this goal, they're making 4 types of changes, and these are changes across every spec in the game. So, first, ensuring you do not need add-ons, and the example they give is Roll the Bones. It is being massively simplified where now it rolls a buff between level 1 and 4. There are fixed bonuses based on the level. It's still random, but it's nowhere near as complicated to reroll, as an example. You get fixed bonuses based on the level. It's still random, but it's nowhere near as complicated to reroll as it was previously, where essentially a lot of people would just compute that logic over in a weak aura and then have the weak aura tell them what to do. Second then, removing abilities that aren't quote, meaningful, like say removing some of Assassination's abilities that they just stuff into their cooldowns. For Resto Druids, that means keeping Effervescence up will be easier than just pressing the button whenever it falls off. The third strategy then is modifiers. And this is a big one. Every spec is losing huge percentage buffs from talents, and all of that power is being shifted back into your base spells. The core idea is that whenever you press a button, it's going to do damage or healing by itself. It won't be relying on a bunch of talents to actually make it useful. Buffs still exist though, but they're smaller or flat damage instead of massive percentages. As an example, we can look at Essence Break from Havoc Demon Hunter. It used to buff Chaos Strike by 80%. Now, it just adds some flat damage instead. Though, there's one spec they may have gone a little bit too far on, or perhaps way too far on, and I'll talk about that one later. The fourth change then is, quote, important but subtle talent interactions. They call out Balance's Waning Twilight. It was one small talent, but it dominated their entire damage profile, so they're gutting it, and they're also gutting others like it. So, that's what Blizzard wants to do, and they've already started, so let's take a look at what the changes are to see if they've succeeded. Right, this isn't going to be a full breakdown of every single change. That's because there are 38,000 words of patch notes. I'm not kidding when I say I can only spot 3 specs without a major shift in gameplay, which, by the way, are Havoc, Frost DK, and Prot Warrior. And do you know why that makes a lot of sense? Well, because those were the last 3 reworks put into the game. That's not to say they've got no changes, though they do actually have ones which should make them even better. And what I'm going to do today is pick out the biggest examples. I'm going to walk you through them and we'll see what this new version of World of Warcraft looks like. Frost mages are a perfect example here. Obviously, without playing it for a while, you can't really tell how it feels, but I can tell you this. You're going to need a lot fewer keybinds. As an example, instead of being on their own buttons, Glacial Spike and Comet Storm now override Frostbolt and Blizzard whenever they're available. So essentially, you're getting similar effects, it's just happening in a somewhat different way, which cuts down on the number of keybinds that you need. So, in this case, 2 keybinds. But obviously at a cost. That cost being that you can't choose not to use them. Though given the other changes that have went on, that's really not as bad as you might think. As an example, their whole shatter mechanic is changing. Now, all of their spells stack a debuff called freezing, and this debuff is popped by Ice Lance for flat damage. So basically, no more guaranteed crits, which means no more insane scaling, but also no more planning around the travel time and flurry charges that we'd previously been dealing with. And to make scaling even less crazy, Icy Veins is being removed, and now Ray of Frost is going to be your major damage cooldown. But in a gesture of goodwill, they're giving you your Water Elemental back as a talent, just without the ability to freeze. Now I know that all seems weird, and it honestly is a bit of a crazy rework. So much is changing here. We've got all of the base damage increasing, our talent scaling is going way down, and a whole ton of other changes. The new Frost is very obviously simplified, and there are at least 3 fewer buttons to press. And essentially, that's the blueprint for one of WoW's most approachable specs. Let's try another example, and one that has often not been approachable: the Feral Druid. They're losing snapshotting on everything except for Tiger's Fury and from Prowl. And, at least in the opinion of some, even better, the icons of bleeds will now change to show whenever they're empowered. Which I've got to say is a really nice little change. But it does come at a cost. Blood Talons is completely gone. So is Brutal Slash and Adaptive Swarm. But in return, you're getting Chomp, which is a new ability that you can only use at low energy. To put it simply then, this reduces button count and it brings down the skill ceiling. At the same time, actually maximizing the use of Chomp at low energy does sound like a little bit of a challenge. The difference with Chomp as compared to say Blood Talons is that Chomp is way easier to understand and track. So basically, no add-ons would really be needed to make that stuff easier for you. Now these changes all sound maybe great on paper, but I will admit they're a little bit scary. It's starting to sound like depth is being removed. Let's move on to another example though, and that's the Unholy Death Knight, and again we see a similar story here. Now a lot of people will be excited about this. Festering Wounds are gone. So is Unholy Assault, which was a big damage boost cooldown. They also don't need Death and Decay up to cleave, they can just do it naturally. And overall I'd say it's a big improvement, and one that actually doesn't have any caveats to it. But fundamentally, it's the same story. Anything that was complicated to track or that scaled too harshly is gone. And this is a perfect example because people basically love it. It's managed to solve serious problems in the spec and introduce both disease-heavy and necromancer-style builds, which are things that people have wanted for years. They've even kept Gargoyle. Gargoyle ramps up damage based on what you do during the window, so it's hard to optimize. So basically, there's fantasy, there's simplification, and still there is depth. So it's a good example. Now these class changes across the board are, I would say, rather elegant. The genuine class fantasy elements coming to loads of classes are the sorts of things we've waited for years and years. To just give you another example, Affliction Warlock is finally losing Malefic Rapture. It's back to spending in a stable Affliction, and people seem kind of overjoyed about it. So, from these examples, out of 40, it looks like Blizzard has met their goals. These specs are all definitely simpler. There are fewer buttons to press, they don't have as many things to track on nameplates or with add-ons, and the big scaling talents and abilities have been removed, allowing for more steady baseline damage. Now, the skill expression, I would say, seems to mostly still be there. But there is a catch, and that's that only time will tell if it's still enough to keep people playing. You see, that's the real danger here. Blizzard are fiddling with the part of World of Warcraft that's held up solidly for 20 years. That being said, it's held up with the support. of weak ores, of boss mods, and all of these things that a lot of people now find themselves not really wanting. But most of all, the impression I get is that this, quite simply, is a new generation of WoW combat. I don't think we can look at one or two changes to our class and think, this will be way better, this will be way worse. This has got to be taken in context of the add-on changes, the new game UI, and also all the changes they're making within dungeons and raids. So though I do think this is a dangerous thing for Blizzard to change, I don't think it's something to worry about humongously just yet. And I'll tell you why. Here's the thing. Patch 11.2 has been one of the most fun patches of WoW, encounter-wise, for quite a long time indeed. And that really is important, because Midnight is going to be building on that. It will be going in a similar direction. And we need to remember that class gameplay is just one part of the puzzle. We are heading into a world without combat add-ons. Blizzard have promised that that means bosses and dungeons will be changing to compensate. We may even find enemies in Midnight that are a bit more taxing to make up for the relative rebalance between class complexity and encounters. Here's one serious possibility. Blizzard might be cautious. Without add-ons, many people will need to readjust. They will need to relearn the game. You know, instead of an air horn and a flashing screen telling them what to do, they'll need to watch the enemy cast bars and animations. And that is a serious change for a lot of people. If WoW is moving complexity from classes to encounters, then I think that is fine, actually. I think simpler classes will feel great. Everything will be just dandy. But the problem is, we just don't know if that's true yet, or if the whole game is just going to get a whole lot easier. And I've got one scary example for you, and that's healers, specifically the Resto Shaman. Healers are losing cooldowns, and they're shifting more healing into the baseline abilities, but Shamans got hit real hard. Fian, a longtime guide writer, tweeted in disbelief at how much was removed. I'm not joking when I say they almost look like a vanilla or TBC healer now. That's absolutely huge, and with changes that drastic, and without seeing how Midnight feels to play, I don't just mean from some alpha testing at level 92, I mean at max level, in a heroic raid or a mythic raid, that sort of thing. Without actually having hands-on in that, we just can't really know how it's going to play. But thankfully, I do think it's not all doom. I think big changes like this are obviously part of Blizzard's plan. You see, at the start of this video, I quoted a blue post from them, and the rest of that post is relevant too. It says that what we're seeing is not the final version of any of these specs. It says that it's a first draft because they want us to play with them, they want us to play with them early, and they want to get feedback. They basically want to know if and where they have went too far, or perhaps where they haven't went far enough. Now, as I record this video, it's the 2nd of October 2025. Blizzard have not publicly said when this expansion is going to come out. We have seen one previously reliable leaker say that it would be the 26th of February 2026, and even just doing some napkin maths, my own calculations came out to March, and that was based on taking some War Within dates and just shifting them about relatively. What that essentially means, though, is it's October. They actually have plenty of time to fix this. Not because the expansion is miles away, but because the alpha has only just started, but it started with major changes to all 40 specs already in. So, it'll be interesting to see how this overall rolls. My experiments playing World of Warcraft with a gamepad sure as hell will get a lot more interesting now that it seems the game is, kind of moving in that direction. Let me know what you think, though. Personally, and especially as time has went on, I'm finding myself enjoying the encounters and the teamwork a lot more in World of Warcraft. And for the last few tiers, I've, not actually used boss mods or anything. I mean, literally our heroic curve clear of Maniforge Omega was pretty much add-onless from me, other than some things to get gamepads actually feeling nice for the experiment that I was running. So, at least within that context, I can see these things working and being fun. Though a lot of you will hear me say that and absolutely eye roll, and I completely get that. The me that played World of Warcraft, say, back in Mists of Pandaria, who enjoyed things like double readiness on a hunter, yeah, he'd be eye rolling at that kind of thing as well. I think, with where we are right now, we just need to wait and see. But there's far more to talk about with Midnight, and if you want to know all the other things that have happened, check out this video next.